The mechanic was young, maybe 25, and he worked alone in the small garage on the edge of town. When the army recruiter's vehicle broke down during a storm, he figured it would be an easy fix. Just another customer. But as the young mechanic worked, he began commenting on modifications that weren't visible, mentioning part numbers that weren't printed anywhere, and suggesting upgrades that only someone with classified knowledge would know about. The recruiter watched in growing amazement and suspicion. This wasn't just mechanical skill. This was intimate knowledge of military hardware. And suddenly, the recruiter realized he wasn't dealing with an ordinary small-town mechanic. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're growing every day, and your support means everything. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight when Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez pulled his government-issued Chevy Tahoe into the parking lot of Thompson's Auto Repair. It was the only garage with lights still on in Millbrook, Texas, population 3,847, and his vehicle had started making a noise that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. Rodriguez was on his way back to Fort Hood after a recruiting trip to Austin. The storm had caught him off guard, and now something under the hood was rattling like a box of bolts. As an army recruiter, he'd driven thousands of miles in government vehicles, and he knew when something was seriously wrong. The garage was small, maybe 4 bays, with the kind of worn concrete floors and oil-stained walls that spoke of decades of honest work. A single mechanic was visible under the hood of a pickup truck, his movements efficient and focused. The name painted on the glass door read, Thompson's Auto, quality service since 1987. Rodriguez knocked on the door frame. The mechanic looked up. Young guy, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair and the kind of lean build that suggested he was stronger than he looked. His coveralls were clean but well used, and there was something about his posture that Rodriguez couldn't quite place. "We're closed," the mechanic said, but his tone wasn't unfriendly. "Storm caught me working late." "Army recruiter," Rodriguez said, gesturing to his vehicle. "Something's wrong under the hood. I can pay overtime rates." The young man considered this, wiping his hands on a rag. "What kind of noise?" "Rattling. Started about 50 miles back. Sounds like it's coming from the engine block." "Pull it into Bay 2, the mechanic said, hitting a button that raised the garage door. "I'm Danny Thompson. Mike Rodriguez. I appreciate this." As Rodriguez drove the Tahoe into the garage, he noticed how Danny moved around the space. There was a precision to his movements, an economy of motion that reminded Rodriguez of soldiers he'd served with. But that was probably just the efficiency of someone who'd been working on cars for years. Danny popped the hood and immediately began his inspection. Rodriguez watched as the young mechanic's hands moved over the engine with surprising familiarity. 2018 Tahoe, Danny said without looking at the VIN number. 5.3 LV8. Government fleet vehicle. "How'd you know it was government fleet?" Danny paused for a fraction of a second. "The maintenance stickers. Fleet vehicles have a different service schedule." Rodriguez looked more closely at his vehicle. There were indeed small stickers he'd never really noticed, but Danny's immediate recognition seemed like more than casual observation. "Found your problem," Danny said, pointing to a specific area near the engine block. "Your motor mount bracket is loose. The bolt that connects to the transmission housing has backed out about 3 threads." Rodriguez leaned in to look. "I don't see any loose bolts." "Right there." Danny pointed to an area that looked perfectly normal to Rodriguez. "See how the bracket has shifted? That's why you're getting the rattle. The engine's moving more than it should under acceleration." Danny reached for his tools and began working. His hands moved with the kind of confidence that came from intimate knowledge of the system. But as Rodriguez watched, he began to notice things that didn't quite add up. "You know," Danny said as he worked, "these Tahoes are solid vehicles, but the government specs have some weird modifications. The suspension's reinforced for extra weight capacity, and the electrical systems hardened against electromagnetic interference." Rodriguez felt a chill. Those weren't specifications that would be common knowledge, even among experienced mechanics. The electromagnetic hardening, in particular, was a detail that only someone with military vehicle experience would know about. "The transmission cooler's also oversized," Danny continued, apparently unaware of the effect his words were having. "Standard civilian models use a smaller unit, but fleet vehicles need the extra cooling capacity for extended high-speed operations." "How do you know all that?" Rodriguez asked carefully. Danny's hands paused for just a moment. You work on enough fleet vehicles, you pick things up. But Rodriguez's suspicion was growing. In his 15 years of military service, he'd worked with motor pool mechanics, civilian contractors, and specialty repair shops. The level of detail Danny was displaying wasn't something you picked up casually. The interesting thing about these models, Danny said, continuing his work, is that they're based on the same platform as the up-armored vehicles we use overseas. Same drivetrain, similar electrical architecture. The main difference is the armor plating and the run-flat tire systems. Rodriguez went very still. Danny's wrench slipped, clanging against the engine block. It was the first mistake Rodriguez had seen him make. I meant you, Danny said quickly. You guys in the military. But Rodriguez was now paying very close attention. The comment about up-armored vehicles, the detailed knowledge of military specifications, the casual use of "we" when referring to military operations, none of it fit with a small-town mechanic who'd supposedly learned everything from working on fleet vehicles. You seem to know a lot about military vehicles, Rodriguez said, his voice carefully neutral. Like I said, you work on enough of them. What's the part number for the transmission cooler? Danny rattled off a 12-digit alphanumeric code without hesitation. Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken. That part number wasn't printed anywhere on civilian vehicles. It was an internal military designation that only someone with direct access to military supply chains would know. And the electromagnetic hardening? Rodriguez pressed. What frequency range does it protect against? 400 to 6,000 megahertz, Danny replied automatically. Then he stopped working entirely. He'd realized his mistake. Rodriguez stared at him. The frequency range for electromagnetic hardening of military vehicles was classified information. It wasn't something that appeared in any civilian manual or specification sheet. The only way Danny could know that information was if he'd had direct training on military electronic systems. Who are you? Rodriguez asked quietly. Danny straightened up, his tools still in his hands. For a moment, neither man spoke. The rain continued to pound on the garage roof, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Rodriguez could see Danny considering his options, weighing what to say. I'm a mechanic, Danny said finally. Mechanics don't know classified electromagnetic specifications. Maybe I read more than most mechanics. That information isn't in any manual you can read. Trust me. Danny set down his tools and looked at Rodriguez directly. What makes you so sure about that? Because I helped write some of those manuals. Vehicle specifications, maintenance protocols, security modifications. I spent 8 years working with motor pool operations before I became a recruiter. The two men stared at each other across the engine bay. Rodriguez could see Danny calculating, trying to decide how much truth to reveal. There was something in the younger man's eyes that reminded Rodriguez of soldiers he'd known. A kind of watchfulness, an awareness that came from experience in dangerous places. Your vehicle's fixed, Danny said, avoiding the question. Motor mount secure. Should run fine. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm giving. Rodriguez wasn't ready to let it go. The knowledge you just displayed about military vehicle systems. That's not something you learn from working on civilian fleet cars. That's specialized training. The kind they give to military mechanics who work on classified vehicles. Danny began cleaning his tools, his movements deliberate and controlled. You're reading too much into it. Am I? Let me ask you something else. What's the torque specification for the axle nuts on an MATV? Without thinking, Danny replied, 450 foot-pounds, plus or minus 10%. The answer came so quickly, so automatically, that both men realized what had just happened. Danny had answered a question about a vehicle that wasn't even in production when he would have been in high school. The mine-resistant ambush-protected all-terrain vehicle was specialized military equipment that only someone with direct experience would know about. Shit, Danny muttered. Yeah, Rodriguez said quietly. Shit. Emerges Danny walked over to a workbench and sat down heavily. He looked like someone who'd been carrying a secret for too long and was tired of the wait. How long have you been out? Rodriguez asked. 3 years. What unit? Danny was quiet for a long moment. Does it matter? It might. Depends on why you're fixing cars instead of working on military vehicles, where those skills would be useful. Danny laughed, but there was no humor in it. Useful. Yeah, my skills were real useful. Rodriguez pulled up a chair. As a recruiter, he'd learned to read people, to understand what motivated them and what held them back. Danny had the look of someone who'd seen too much too young. Special operations. Rodriguez guessed. Something like that. Vehicle specialist. Among other things. Rodriguez nodded. He'd worked with enough special operations personnel to recognize the type. Young men who'd been given advanced training, deployed to dangerous places, and asked to do jobs that required skills far beyond their years. What happened? Danny stood up and walked back to the Tahoe, running his hands along the engine block. You know how it is. You do your job, you follow orders, you come home. Except sometimes the job follows you home too. What kind of job? The kind where you maintain vehicles that aren't supposed to exist, in places that aren't on any map, for operations that never officially happened. Rodriguez felt a chill. He'd heard rumors, whispers in the military community about units that operated in deep black programs. Vehicle specialists who worked on equipment so classified that their very existence was denied. How young were you? 19 when I enlisted. 21 when they selected me for the program. What program? Danny looked at him with eyes that seemed older than his years. You ever heard of Ghost Motor? Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken. Ghost Motor was a legend in military circles. A rumored program that maintained and modified vehicles for the most classified special operations units. The kind of program that officially didn't exist, but was whispered about in secure facilities and classified briefing. I've heard stories. Stories are all anyone ever hears. The reality is different. What was the reality? Danny began working on the engine again, but Rodriguez could tell it was just to keep his hands busy. The reality was that we maintained vehicles for operations that couldn't fail. Armored cars that had to look civilian. Trucks that needed to run silent. Motorcycles that could outrun anything the enemy had where? Everywhere. Syria, Afghanistan, places in Africa where Americans weren't supposed to be operating. We'd get called in, modify vehicles for specific missions, maintain them in the field, and make sure they never broke down when lives depended on them. Rodriguez was beginning to understand. And you were good at it. I was the best at it, Danny said without boasting. I could make a pickup truck bulletproof, make a motorcycle run silent, make any vehicle disappear into civilian traffic. I knew every vehicle the military used, every weakness, every strength, every modification that could keep people alive. So what went wrong? Danny's hands stopped moving. Nothing went wrong. Everything went right. Too right. I don't understand. When you're really good at keeping vehicles running in impossible conditions, they keep sending you to more impossible places. When you prove you can handle classified modifications, they give you more classified projects. When you demonstrate you can be trusted with secrets, they trust you with bigger secrets. Rodriguez was beginning to see the pattern. Until the secrets became too big. Until I knew too much about operations I wasn't supposed to know existed. Until I could identify vehicles and equipment from programs so black that acknowledging them would compromise national security. Like what? Danny looked at him for a long moment. Like the fact that your Tahoe has 3 modifications that aren't in any civilian specification manual. The engine management system has been programmed with parameters that only exist in classified variants. The GPS unit has hardware that allows for encrypted communication with military satellites. And the fuel injection system has been modified to run on JP-8 fuel in emergency situations. Rodriguez stared at him. Everything Danny had just said was accurate, and all of it was information that should have been known only to a very small number of people with the highest security clearances. How do you know that? Because I helped design some of those modifications. The garage fell silent except for the rain on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. Rodriguez was processing what he'd just heard. If Danny was telling the truth, he wasn't just a former military mechanic. He was someone who'd worked on some of the most classified vehicle programs in the US military. Why are you here? Rodriguez asked. Why are you fixing civilian cars in a small town instead of working for defense contractors making 6 figures? Danny closed the hood of the Tahoe and wiped his hands again. Because defense contractors ask questions. They do background checks. They want references. They want to know exactly what you did and where you did it. And you can't tell them. Some of what I did is classified at levels where even acknowledging the classification exists would be a crime. How do you put that on a resume? Rodriguez was beginning to understand the impossible situation Danny found himself in. Highly skilled, extensively trained, but unable to prove his qualifications without violating federal law. What about veteran services? The VA has programs for guys with your background. Danny laughed bitterly. The VA wants documentation. Service records. Official acknowledgement of your training and experience. But when your service doesn't officially exist, when your training records are classified above the clearance level of VA counselors, when your commanding officers can't acknowledge they knew you? What documentation do you provide? There have to be people who could vouch for you. Sure. People whose names I can't mention, who worked on programs I can't discuss, for operations that never happened. Real helpful. Rodriguez felt a growing sense of the injustice Danny was describing. Here was someone who'd served his country with distinction, gained valuable skills, and made sacrifices, but couldn't prove any of it through official channels. So you came here. I came here because nobody asks questions about why a mechanic knows how to fix cars. I do good work. I charge fair prices. I keep to myself. It's a simple life. But you're wasting your talents. Danny looked at him sharply. Am I? Today I fixed Mrs. Patterson's transmission, so she could get to her cancer treatments. Yesterday I got Jim Carson's truck running, so he could get to his job at the plant. Last week I kept the school bus running so kids could get home safely. How is that wasting anything? Rodriguez realized he'd touched a nerve. I didn't mean to suggest your work here isn't important. Good. Because it is important. Maybe not as dramatic as modifying vehicles for classified operations, but it matters to the people in this town. But don't you miss it? The challenge? The level of work you were doing? Danny was quiet for a moment. What I miss is the sense of purpose. Knowing that the work you did mattered, that it could mean the difference between a mission succeeding or failing, between people coming home or not coming home. And you don't feel that sense of purpose here. I feel a different kind of purpose. Quieter but real. Rodriguez walked around the garage, looking at the tools, the equipment, the organized workspace. Everything was clean, efficient, professional. But he could see signs of capability that went far beyond what a typical small-town garage would need. You've got some sophisticated diagnostic equipment here. I like to do things right. This computer system, Rodriguez said, pointing to a diagnostic unit that looked more advanced than what he'd seen in military motor pools. This is military-grade hardware. Danny didn't respond, but Rodriguez could see he'd hit another sensitive area. Where did you get it? Does it matter where I got it? It helps me do better work. It matters because equipment like this isn't available through normal channels. This is the kind of diagnostic system they use on classified vehicles. Danny turned to face him directly. Sergeant Rodriguez, you came here because your vehicle was broken. It's fixed. The storm's letting up. Maybe it's time for you to get back on the road. But Rodriguez wasn't ready to leave. Something about Danny's situation bothered him, and as a recruiter, he'd learned to trust his instincts about people. How old are you, Danny? 25. So you enlisted at 18, got selected for classified programs by 21, and you've been out for 3 years. That means you served for 4 years total. Math checks out. 4 years isn't long enough to gain the level of expertise you've demonstrated. The knowledge you have about vehicle systems, the familiarity with classified modifications, that takes longer than 4 years to develop. Danny began putting away his tools. Maybe I'm a fast learner. Or maybe your service lasted longer than 4 years, and you're not telling me the whole truth about when you got out. Danny stopped what he was doing. Why does this matter to you? Rodriguez considered the question. Because I've spent my career working with soldiers. I know talent when I see it, and I know when someone's been wasted. You're wasted here. I'm not wasted. I'm safe. The word hung in the air between them. Safe. Not satisfied, not fulfilled, not happy. Safe. Safe from what? Danny walked over to the garage door and looked out at the rain. From questions like the ones you're asking. There's something else, Rodriguez said, watching Danny carefully. The way you diagnosed my vehicle, the specific knowledge you have. I've seen that before. Where? Kandahar, 2019. I was working with a logistics unit that supported special operations. There was a vehicle specialist there, young guy, maybe 23. He had the same kind of knowledge you have. Could look at any vehicle and immediately know everything about it. Specifications, weaknesses, modifications. Danny had gone very still. His name was Daniel Thompson. Called himself Danny. Worked on vehicles for operations, so classified that most of us didn't even know they existed. Rodriguez watched Danny's reaction. The younger man's face had lost color, and his breathing had changed. The thing about this guy, Rodriguez continued, was that he never worked alone. Always had a partner. Another specialist named Kevin Morrison. They were a team. Inseparable. Until something happened in Syria. Stop, Danny said quietly. Morrison didn't make it home. Vehicle they were working on took an IED hit during a convoy operation. Thompson was supposed to be in that vehicle too, but he'd stayed behind to finish modifications on another truck. I said stop. Thompson blamed himself. Survivor's guilt. The army offered him counseling, offered him new assignments, offered him everything they could think of. But he disappeared one day. Just gone. No forwarding address, no contact information. Like he'd vanished. Danny turned around, and Rodriguez could see tears in his eyes. Kevin was supposed to be safe, Danny said, his voice barely above a whisper. We were working on communication systems, not combat vehicles. It was supposed to be a routine convoy, just moving equipment from one base to another. But you'd modified the vehicles. I'd upgraded the communication arrays, improved the signal encryption. The convoy was carrying sensitive equipment, so they wanted better comms. Kevin and I had worked on those trucks for 2 weeks, making sure everything was perfect. What went wrong? The IED was bigger than intelligence suggested. The up armor held, but the blast flipped the truck. Kevin was trapped in the electronics bay, unconscious. By the time they got him out, Danny's voice trailed off. It wasn't your fault, Rodriguez said. I was supposed to be in that truck. Kevin took my place because I wanted to finish work on another vehicle. If I'd been there, if I'd been the one trapped in the electronics bay, you might both be dead. Or I might have been able to get us both out. Rodriguez understood now. Danny's expertise, his knowledge, his skills, they all came with the weight of loss. He wasn't just hiding from questions about classified programs. He was hiding from the guilt of surviving when his partner didn't. So you came here. I came here because nobody in Millbrook, Texas cares about electromagnetic hardening or classified vehicle modifications. They care about whether their cars run and whether they can afford the repairs. It's simple. Clean. Nobody gets hurt. But you're still helping people. In small ways. Safe ways. Rodriguez looked around the garage again, seeing it differently now. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a kind of sanctuary. A place where someone with Danny's background could use his skills without the weight of life and death consequences. The army's been looking for you, Rodriguez said. Danny's head snapped up. What do you mean? Daniel Thompson, formerly attached to classified vehicle modification programs. The army considers you a valuable asset. They want to bring you back. For what? New programs. Civilian contractor positions. They're developing next-generation vehicle systems, and they need people with your background. Danny shook his head. I'm done with that life. Are you? Because watching you work tonight, seeing how you handled my vehicle, you came alive in a way that suggests you miss more than you're admitting. Danny considered this. Maybe I miss the work, but I don't miss the consequences. What if there were ways to use your skills without the same level of risk? Like what? Rodriguez pulled out his phone and showed Danny a website. Defense contractor positions. Vehicle development and testing. Based in Texas. Civilian jobs, but they work on military projects. Good pay, normal hours, and the chance to use your skills for something meaningful. Danny looked at the screen, and Rodriguez could see interest flickering in his eyes. What's the catch? No catch. They need people with your background. The work is classified, but it's development and testing, not field operations. You'd be working on the vehicles that could save lives, not risking your own life to maintain them. And they wouldn't ask questions about my background. They'd ask questions, but they'd ask the right people. People who understand classified programs and can verify your experience without compromising operational security. Danny was quiet for several minutes, clearly thinking. I'd have to move. Austin's only 2 hours from here. You could keep this garage, work there during the week, come back on weekends. Why are you doing this? Rodriguez considered the question. Because I've seen too many good soldiers get lost in the transition to civilian life. You've got skills that could make a real difference, and you're using them to fix pickup trucks in a town where the most complicated vehicle problem is a bad alternator. There's nothing wrong with fixing pickup trucks. You're right. There's nothing wrong with it. But there's something wrong with wasting abilities that could save lives on a larger scale. Danny walked back to the garage door and looked out at the storm, which was finally beginning to subside. Kevin would have told me to take the job, he said finally. Yeah, he always said that hiding from your abilities was just another way of giving up. That the best way to honor the people we lost was to keep using our skills to help people. Sounds like a smart guy. He was the smartest person I ever knew. Could diagnose vehicle problems that other mechanics couldn't even comprehend. Made me better at my job just by working with him. And he died because you weren't there. He died because war is random and cruel, and doesn't care how good you are, or how much you want to protect the people you work with. Rodriguez stood up. But that doesn't mean you stop trying to protect people. Danny turned back to him. What do you mean? The contractor job I showed you. They develop vehicles that protect soldiers in combat. Better armor, more reliable systems, communications equipment that keeps people connected and alive. If you took that job, you'd be protecting people like Kevin. Maybe preventing other people from going through what you went through. Danny was quiet for a long time. I'd have to use my real name. My real background. Yeah, people would know what I'd done, where I'd served. The right people would know. The people who understand that kind of service and respect it. And if I can't handle it? If the memories are too much, then you come back here and fix pickup trucks. But at least you'll know you tried. Danny finished putting away his tools and turned off the diagnostic equipment. The garage became quieter, more intimate, lit only by the overhead fluorescents and the occasional flash of lightning outside. Tell me about the contractor job, Danny said finally. Rodriguez pulled up more information on his phone. Lockheed Martin, Special Programs Division. They're developing the next generation of military vehicles. Autonomous systems, advanced armor, hybrid powertrains. They need people who understand not just how vehicles work, but how they work under combat conditions. Autonomous systems. Self-driving vehicles for supply convoys, reconnaissance platforms, equipment that can operate in areas too dangerous for human drivers. Danny's interest was clearly piqued. That could save a lot of lives. That's the idea. No more young soldiers like Kevin having to risk their lives maintaining equipment in hostile territory. What would my role be? Senior Vehicle Systems Specialist. You'd work with engineering teams to design and test new systems. You'd provide input on real-world conditions, help them understand what works in the field and what doesn't. And the security clearance. They'd reinstate your clearance based on your previous service. The program manager is former military. He understands the kind of work you did. Danny walked over to a bulletin board covered with photos, customers, successful repairs, thank you notes from satisfied clients. It was clear that he'd built something meaningful here, even if it wasn't what he'd originally planned for his life. I'd miss this, he said. You could keep it. Work the contractor job during the week. Come back here on weekends. Keep your connection to the community. And if the nightmares come back. Rodriguez recognized the admission for what it was. A sign that Danny was dealing with more than just guilt over Kevin's death. The company has counseling services. People who specialize in working with veterans from classified programs. People who understand what I've been through. People who've been through it themselves. Danny nodded slowly. I'd need time to think about it. Of course. But Danny, and I'm going to call you Danny because that's who you are now, you can't spend the rest of your life hiding from your abilities. Kevin wouldn't want that. How do you know what Kevin would want? Because I knew guys like Kevin. We all did. The kind of soldiers who believed that skills like yours were gifts that came with responsibilities. Danny was quiet for several minutes. Rodriguez could see him struggling with the decision, weighing his desire for safety against his sense of duty. If I took this job, Danny said finally, and if I couldn't handle it, if the memories were too much, then you'd have tried. And trying matters. Kevin used to say that. Smart guy. Danny smiled for the first time that evening. Yeah, he was. Rodriguez handed him a business card. The hiring manager's name is Colonel Davidson, retired. Call him tomorrow, tell him we talked. He'll fast-track your application. Danny took the card and looked at it. And you? What do you get out of this? I get to know that I helped connect the right person with the right opportunity. That's what recruiters do. Even when the person isn't eligible for the army anymore. Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform, Danny. It just changes form. 3 months later, Rodriguez was driving through Millbrook on his way to another recruiting appointment when he decided to stop by Thompson's Auto Repair. The garage was open, but instead of Danny, he found an older man working under the hood of a sedan. Excuse me, Rodriguez said. I'm looking for Danny Thompson. The older man looked up. You just missed him. He only works weekends now. Got himself a job in Austin during the week. How's he doing? Better than I've seen him in years. Whatever that job is, it's good for him. More confident, more like his old self. Rodriguez smiled. His old self. Danny's always been good with cars, but lately he's been different. More engaged, more willing to talk about technical stuff. It's like he remembered who he used to be. That's good to hear. You know Danny? We met once. During a storm. As Rodriguez drove away, he felt satisfied in a way that went beyond his normal recruiting successes. He'd helped someone reconnect with their purpose, their skills, their sense of service. 2 weeks later, he received a text message from an unknown number. working on autonomous convoy systems. Kevin would approve. Thanks for pushing me to try. Danny, Rodriguez saved the message. In his experience as a recruiter, the best successes were often the ones where you helped people find their way back to themselves. The conference room at Lockheed Martin's Special Programs Division was filled with engineers, former military officers, and technical specialists. At the head of the table, a young man in business casual was presenting design modifications for the next-generation autonomous military vehicle. The key insight, Danny Thompson was saying, is that autonomous systems need to account for real-world combat conditions that don't exist in testing environments. The vehicle needs to be able to diagnose and repair itself under hostile fire, in extreme weather conditions, with limited human oversight. The assembled team listened intently as Danny outlined modifications based on his field experience. His presentations had become legendary in the company, detailed, practical, and informed by knowledge that couldn't be gained from textbooks or simulations. The electronic countermeasures need to be integrated at the component level, he continued. And the diagnostic systems need redundancy that accounts for partial system failures under combat stress. Colonel Davidson, the program manager, nodded approvingly. In 6 months, Danny had become one of their most valuable assets, contributing insights that were transforming how they approached vehicle design. After the meeting, Danny stayed behind to review technical specifications. His work was challenging, meaningful, and directly connected to protecting soldiers in the field. It was everything Rodriguez had promised, and more. On his desk was a photo of him and Kevin Morrison, taken during their last assignment together. Next to it was a business card from Thompson's Auto Repair. 2 different lives, connected by service and purpose. Every Friday, Danny drove back to Millbrook, where he spent weekends fixing cars for people who needed reliable transportation. Mrs. Patterson's cancer treatments, Jim Carson's job at the plant, the school bus that carried local kids safely, all of it still mattered. But Monday through Thursday, he worked on systems that could save lives on a much larger scale. Vehicles that would protect soldiers, reduce risks, and maybe prevent other young mechanics from going through what he and Kevin had experienced. IT wasn't the life he'd planned when he first enlisted at 18. It wasn't the life he'd imagined when he'd hidden in a small Texas town 3 years ago. But it was a life that honored both his skills and his losses, his need for purpose and his desire for peace. And sometimes, late at night when he was working on particularly challenging technical problems, he could almost hear Kevin's voice encouraging him to push harder, think deeper, and never stop trying to make things better. The mechanic who'd seemed like just another small-town repair shop owner had found his way back to service. Not the same service, but service nonetheless. And in conference rooms and testing facilities, his knowledge was helping to build the future of military vehicle technology. Some stories end with dramatic revelations and public recognition. This one ended with quiet purpose and the satisfaction of work that mattered. The storm that had brought Rodriguez to Thompson's Auto Repair had passed. But the connection it created had changed 2 lives. The recruiter who'd learned to see beyond appearances, and the mechanic who'd found his way back to meaningful service. In the end, Rodriguez reflected, the best recruiting happened when you helped people find not just jobs, but purpose. And sometimes, the most valuable people were hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to see past the uniform they wore to the skills they carried within. Danny Thompson had stopped hiding, and the world was better for it.